This evening we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Bruce Trotter, who for many years, over 20 years, was the director of the Study Center in Charlottesville, UVA, and for the last 5.5 years has been the director of our national affiliation group, the Consortium of Christian Study Centers. And for many, many years, one of Drew's favorite things to do has been to really go all over the country, right, to speak about God in movies, basically. Talking about the Academy Award nominees for Best Picture and what they have to tell us about ourselves. So Drew is going to come unpack Oscars for us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Hope you all got a sheet. Did everybody get a sheet with the various movies on it? And one of the first things I'll do is go over that sheet. One of the interesting things, we'll make reference to this again in just a few minutes, but one of the interesting things about this year is that of the 8 nominees for Best Picture, one of them is a complete surprise box office smash hit, American Sniper, and the rest of them nobody has seen. they're very obscure movies for the most part, not entirely, but really you've got American Sniper, which is number 3 of the movies released in 2014 at the box office already, because it was released on Christmas Day. So it's pretty amazing that it's made that much money in this short of a time. And then the next one is The Imitation Game, which is like 47th on the list, and 2 of them didn't even make the top 100. They're all very fine films, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on there later on. But I thought we'd introduce it first. So let's look at the list. American Sniper is that big box office movie with Clint Eastwood as the director. You might think, well, Clint Eastwood was the director, no surprise that he did well. Well, he did another movie this year. Does anybody know what it was? See? Jersey Boys, a movie about Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And it was just a film of the play. It was very good, but it sank like a stone at the box office. It did not do well at all. So American Sniper is a kind of a surprise. We may talk about that in the Q&A. There'll be plenty of time for questions and answers later. But one way or the other, this is about, of course, the Navy SEAL who was apparently the most successful sniper in American military history with, I think, 165 kills, a guy named Chris Kyle. And his, both, because the movie goes back and forth between Iraq and home, and it talks about his time in Iraq, of course, and is a very good war picture at that time. And then when he's back home, the growing effects of PTSD on him and how he deals with that is the next part of the other part of the movie, how he relates to his wife and kids and all that. Birdman and Boyhood, the next 2, are the 2 that are being talked about as almost certainly one of them going to win on Sunday night. I don't know how many of you knew, but the Oscars presentation is actually this coming Sunday, so good timing for this talk. Birdman's a strange movie by a Mexican director, Alejandro Iñárritu. He had a vision for doing a movie about acting and about the theater, and so that's what he's done. So you've got an interesting film that is a play within a play. You've got all these layers to all the characters, and the movie's about a superhero who is wildly popular. Everybody wants to get their picture taken with him and all, but he hates that because it's so shallow, and he wants to be accepted as an actor. So he quits being a superhero, refuses to do Birdman 4, and then writes and directs and acts in his own Broadway play. So there's a lot of tension between the theater community and the film community that is talked about in this movie, but there's a lot of, it's really dealing with personal demons that the movie's about. Fascinating study. We'll talk a lot about Birdman. Boyhood is the one that probably most of you have heard of. You may not know that this is the one. You knew that there was this movie that was made over 12 years.
They filmed every year for a couple of weeks and then would stop. And then the next year, they'd film for another couple of weeks and stop, and then another couple of weeks. And it's a fascinating idea, and just incredible that they could pull it off. Of course, you've got to hope that the main character doesn't die. I mean, the actor doesn't die, because it's 12 years. Anything can happen. They can get run over by a bus or whatever, or quit. It's funny, the director, Richard Linklater, one of the 4 principal characters in the movie is a girl who is the sister of the main character, Mason Jr. Well, that was Richard Linklater's daughter. And she was the only one who wanted to quit during the middle of the thing. She said, "Well, Dad, can't you just kill my character off?" And he goes, "No, you're in this movie, So it's a fascinating experiment. Some wonder if it's gimmicky or not. It's a very interesting movie if you love movies. Very slow, but anyway, we'll talk about it more too. One movie we won't talk about much is a comedy by a well-known comic writer and director, Wes Anderson. These are very sort of intellectually interesting comedies, if you will. They're very strange. They're absurdist. He did the Royal Tenenbaums. He did, I can't remember what the one last year was Moonrise Kingdom, or 2 years ago, Moonrise Kingdom. This is Grand Budapest Hotel with just this incredible cast, but we won't be saying much about it. But it's kind of an absurdist comedy, and it does fit some of the things we will talk about tonight as well. So we may mention it briefly. The Imitation Game I mentioned, one of a number of true stories. American Sniper was, of course, a true story, or based on a true story. The Imitation Game is another one. The story of Alan Turing, who is a hero in computer science. In fact, many people credit what he actually does in this movie as being the creation of the first computer. And in a very real sense, it was. He and his team creating a machine that would decode the famous Enigma machine of the Nazis, and they were able to do that. There's a second part to this movie. They try to balance the two. I don't think they do as well in the second part, but it's a very personal human interest story as well, because Turing was homosexual, and he gets arrested for his homosexuality in the 50s. He chooses some drug-based therapy instead of going to jail. That drug therapy, most people believe, drives him crazy, and he eventually commits suicide. So it's a very sad story in what was the law even in the 1950s. But nevertheless, it's a fascinating movie about how they actually cracked this code and the relationships of the team and all that sort of thing. The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. Then another one of the true stories, Selma, based in a particular event in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's been a lot of controversy about that movie. We'll make reference to that. We'll talk more about it, but it is the march on from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, that is the focus historically of this film, but it's about King in many ways. Magnificent performance by David Oyelowo, whose dream it had been to do this movie for forever, and he was really the one behind getting it made as well, and he does an amazing performance. Then another true biopic called The Theory of Everything, which is a true biopic all the way from his college days right up into the present day. The story of Stephen Hawking, a well-known physicist whose story really revolves around his relationship with his wife, named Jane Hawking. That's particularly interesting to me as a Christian theologian, because Jane Hawking is a Christian, and very clearly so, and very outspokenly so from the beginning of their relationship. And if you see the movie, you'll be surprised at how positive it is towards her and her views, because she did a PhD in Spanish medieval poetry as well. I mean, she was a pretty smart cookie or is a pretty smart cookie herself. And it's a lot about their relationship, but it's more focused on Hawking, who of course is world famous. And lastly, Whiplash, a very, very good film if you don't mind hard films that have a sort of harsh theme but are extremely well done. Whiplash is about a young man who goes to New York to go to conservatory as a jazz drummer and joins the top jazz band, but it's a larger band. It's not just like four, it's not a quartet. A band that is conducted by an absolute maniac. And the maniac is played by J.K. Simmons. And he's very harsh. He drives them, and he particularly focuses then on this kid, and that's the point of the movie, and drives him. Is he making him better, or is he destroying him? And that's what the question really is in the film. And those of you who are teachers at U of R or something, I mean, the whole idea of pushing a student to his limits or her limits is an interesting idea in teaching. And how do you do that? And this movie really provides a lot of food for thought on that whole issue, where where this happens in this particular film. But Simmons, movie is worth seeing for that performance alone. It is incredible, tremendously energetic. He is up for Best Supporting Actor and almost certainly will win. He's really probably the prime actor in the movie. But the movie companies are able to put people up for what award they want to put them up for, and they figured he was going to have to go up against Benedict Cumberbatch in Imitation Game and Eddie Redmayne in Theory of Everything and Michael Keaton in Birdman. He didn't stand a chance, so they put him up for Best Supporting Actor, and now he's almost certainly going to blow away the competition. He's won everything else in the awards season. So those are the 9 films, and feel free again to ask questions about the ones that I don't talk about if they were one of your favorites, or anything that I don't talk about in the lecture per se. But let's go ahead and begin. In the 15 years since I've been delivering this lecture, the movie industry, which the talk is really about in some ways, has never been in such disarray. A huge dip in domestic box office revenue this year, a continued uncertainty with how to market movies in China. That's a fascinating study. You don't hear a lot about it, but it's very, very interesting what's happening in that regard. Of course, huge populace of people. And the alarming hack of Sony Pictures by North Korea has people in the least efficient industry in America even more on edge and unsure of what the future holds. Even if those 3 things hadn't happened, the continued gain in the respectability, quality, and marketability of what is known now as long-form television might have reached a state where it threatens the movie industry virtually fatally anyway. Of course, movies will never die, just as opera and live theater are far from dead. But their demographic, their profits, their broad significance in the culture, that is of opera and live theater, those have changed dramatically since the movies so rapidly bypassed them in the early 20th century. The change has purified both of these in some ways, but no one would argue that these 2 art forms influence American society now like they once did. I don't know if you know, but Abigail Adams once called the theater the soul of America. No one would say that today. But the application of that title to movies would have been a no-brainer even up into the 1970s. People, when television came out in the 50s, people immediately predicted the total demise of movies. But movies shifted and changed and hung on, and it was amazing how powerfully they retained their status in society, and still do, frankly, even today. We could talk more about that later, but it would have been a no-brainer right up into the 1970s and 80s that movies were really the shapers of our culture in a very real way. But now, television is caught on, and it's really interesting. It's in a contest with television. I'm not sure which one you would say is really the soul of American culture. visually at least. People right across the spectrum, from working class laborers to big city news editors, look forward to the advent of the next season of Downton Abbey or Game of Thrones. But the only highly awaited movie premiere I know of is really only among males from 17 to 24, and that's the next Avengers movie coming out this spring. To move up the cultural scale, the spin-off from Breaking Bad, which many call the best television series of all time. The spin-off called Better Call Saul was much more widely anticipated and watched. It broke a number of records. It's on right now, but its first episode a couple of weeks ago. But it was much more highly anticipated than Birdman or even Boyhood. And you had 12 years to anticipate Boyhood, right? I mention all this because this year's nominees for Best Picture represent a change, I think, in Hollywood's strategy for regaining its status or retaining it, depending upon what you think, in our society. The Academy certainly did not go for its biggest box office winners of the year, though it often doesn't do that. In fact, of the 10 highest grossing movies this year, only one, and it was a total surprise, as I mentioned, was in the Academy's list of nominees. And the pictures they did nominate had the lowest box office ratings since I've been doing this lecture. Total box office was lower for the other 7 movies than in the history of this lecture at all. Even with American Sniper, it's much lower than many other years when you had Avatar or Titanic or The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, or these movies making, $1 billion. Even American Sniper is not going to come close to that because it's getting nothing on the foreign market. No big surprise, but it's been huge domestically. Okay. The box office drop off among the nominees after American Sniper. Quickly, Imitation Game was 47th, 2 of this year's nominees, Boyhood and Whiplash. Boyhood may win, and it's 101st at the box office from last year's movies that were released. 100 other movies made more money than it did. Now, interestingly, this is a little aside that I don't have in my notes. None of these movies are going to lose money because you can make movies for a lot less money now than you used to have. First of all, just digital. You would not believe the cost of film, and you think, oh, come on. No, it's a huge expense because they shoot so much film. Whole second unit teams off somewhere in Afghanistan shooting a mountain or something, and it costs a ton of money to do that, and now you do it digitally for nothing. I mean, it's amazing how much they save that way, but they also don't pay actors. I don't know how many of y'all remember, 30 years ago, it used to not be surprising when Jim Carrey would make $20 million for a movie. That is extremely rare now. Very rare. So anyway, lots less movie. They're still making money. But what's the point? The point is this. It's true that Hollywood often ignores the box office in its voting for Best Picture, but this year they've done so with a vengeance. They've selected films with very definite political and social outlooks, and the Academy voters almost seem to want to say, "Here, America, do some thinking about your life." And not only is lifestyle a focus of this year's films, philosophy, such as it can be worked into a very concrete, story-driven medium of film, is a major contributor in ways that it hasn't been in years. There is pure humanism expressed, as we'll see. There is the resurrection of an old friend of mine from the 60s. Existentialism is really clearly major focus of a couple of these movies, as we'll see. There have been other years in which a few thoughtful, low-budget independent films dominated the landscape of the Oscars. I mean, I think of 1999 when American Beauty won. The other movies that year were Cider House Rules, The Green Mile, The Insider. Really interesting, very thoughtful films. And The Sixth Sense, which was interesting enough. It was a big box office movie, but it was a small film when it came out, and nobody expected it to do what it did either. Very like American Sniper. The Academy seems to be saying they want to be taken seriously, that all the defining of the motion picture industry only in terms of the big studio blockbuster is unfair. That here we have artists working who are producing serious works of art, and we want to use the Oscar stage to show them to you. Whether there's some unseen strategy, manifesting itself here or not, it's hard to deny that philosophy and ethics are at the heart of many of the films this year. Even American Sniper connects it to a certain philosophy of life emphasizing individual action. You can't deny the fact that Bradley Cooper's performance, that the sniper himself, with all of the interest there is in a sort of team aspect to some degree, it's so focused on the great American individualism that we know, from our country's understanding of itself. Huge, huge theme in that movie. The great hero. We talked a lot about that in last year's lecture. But that takes us to the strongest message found in this year's films. It's a philosophy of life that was quite popular in the 60s, as I mentioned. Existentialism is known best at the popular level as the theory that the only meaning one can find in life is by living authentically, that is, passionately and sincerely in the moment. The now, not the then on either side of it on the timeline of existence, is the only part of reality that's relevant. And an existentialist is responsible for creating meaning in that now. That meaning, however, does not transcend the now, but rather requires the doer to live in a series of disconnected moments, and there's some disagreement in existentialism about the connectedness of those moments or the disconnectedness, but mostly disconnected moments. You're supposed to live as authentically as possible to achieve significance. Now, all of this is predicated on a universe that's basically meaningless, that there is no God who ties these moments together, and no revelation of where meaning for the human being is to be found. The two movies appearing to battle it out for Best Picture are perhaps the two clearest examples of this existentialist theme in this year's nominees. Those are Boyhood, that unique project of Richard Linklater, the 12-year-long movie, and Birdman, a movie which is also innovative, if not unique, for its long, extended takes lasting 15 or 20 minutes sometimes. Incredible how much work they had to do. They didn't just have rehearsals where you sit around a table and read through the script in a day, which they often do for movies, and that's rare. This was a 3-week long rehearsal period where they would actually time how long it would take them to go down a hallway and turn left and go down, always talking to the person on their right, and see how long that conversation would go on so that they could time it just right for somebody else to come out of a doorway and start another conversation. And this would go on for 15 or 20 minutes. Well, these actors, if anybody made one mistake, it ruined the whole take. It's just incredible what they had to do to make this movie. And it makes it a very dynamic, one singular moment kind of feeling movie. It's really interesting how form supported the content of that film. Well, let's start with Boyhood, though. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and for a lot of you, it will be like watching paint dry. Nothing of major import happens. There are no deaths, no serious accidents, no life-changing events brought on from outside that alter the family's life dramatically. There is some tension. Events take place, usually fueled by alcohol consumption, that threaten the safety of some of the main characters, but even that not in an overly serious way. All the events that can be considered major result from choices made by characters in the film. Choices in the moment. The father chooses to leave for Alaska before the movie even begins. Then he chooses to come back and wants to be a part of the kids' lives. The mother chooses to marry and divorce. In fact, 3 times. Even the children choose to go to college. though alternatives do not really present themselves in their lives. Almost all the choices in the film, though, are the small choices of normal life as they really are. The movie portrays the mom and kids, for instance, pulling up in their car to drop the kids off for school 5 different times during the film. How many movies have you seen where a mom pulls up and lets the kid off for school and has some big conversation? A lot. Once. That happens 5 times in Boyhood. But doesn't that happen in our normal lives? I mean, it does. That's what life is about. It's pulling up and letting the kids off from school and having some major conversation just as they leave, you know. It's just what happens. But this is hardly the stuff of Iron Man 3. I mean, you know, this is not an action movie at all. But it's just why the film is so existential in its outlook. Nothing binds these moments together. They are simply moments in which the characters must choose to do one thing or the other to find meaning. It's not to say, by the way, that the movie treats all moments of equal value. Certainly there are conversations between the dad, Mason Sr., played by Ethan Hawke, and the children, Mason Jr., played by Eller Coltrane, and Samantha, played by Lorelei Linklater. Those conversations have to do with everything from dating to drinking, but also with subtler ideas of politics and social mores. Those take a place of prominence in some ways in the film. And the moves from town to town when the family has to move to make, you know, jobs. One of the major themes in the movie is of Patricia Arquette's character as a single mom. And she moves to go back to school, then she moves to go to get her master's, and then she eventually gets her PhD and a teaching job, and she marries and divorces several times. And there's lots of moving in the film, and those are major, you know, crucial keynotes. But still, mostly the film is made up of fights between the brother and the sister as little kids, notes being passed between desks at school, ball games with dad, chores the stepdads meet out, sneaking looks at underwear catalogs with the boy and his friend, you know, stuff like that. These are moments in which we create our meaning, just as much as the bigger moments that seem so important for our understanding. Now, you probably wouldn't think much of Boyhood intending to display larger philosophical import. I mean, come on, Drew, how do you know this? If it weren't for the last scene, when Mason Jr. is on a hike with new friends on his first day at college. I mentioned that the film is over 12 years. Mason is 6 when it begins, and he's 18 and going off to college in the last scene of the film. There's an important setup to it. Actually, the scene where he's going off to college is the one I want to talk about first. Mason Jr. is packing to go. Patricia Arquette, who plays the mother, Olivia, in a fit of rage because her baby is going off to college and doesn't even seem to think it's any big deal, blurts out her frustration at how her life has simply been a series of moments. Marriages, babies, divorces, the time when we thought you had strep throat and you didn't, sending her kids off to college. And she says, and now the next moment in my effing life is my funeral. Now, really, actually, that scene is kind of comical in its narcissism as far as I'm concerned, but it really does turn suddenly quiet and very empathetic because she says, you know, I just thought there would be more. And puts her hands in her face, and her face in her hands, and sort of sinks her head down onto the table in despair. The movie cuts immediately to Mason going on the road to college. The conversation, though, that shows how serious the movie is about its existentialism comprises the last scene in this last sequence in the movie, the hike I just mentioned. Mason has typically skipped orientation and has met a new girl in whom he seems quite interested. At a beautiful moment of sunset with the rocks glowing that soft red they only do, you know, in the Texas desert, Mason and his new girlfriend are sitting together on some rocks, enjoying a brief rest, awkwardly trying to continue the conversation they've been having during their walk. They chuckle awkwardly. I mean, there's really isn't any other word to call it. It's really, it's cute, but it's really very true. They're sort of making small talk, and suddenly Mason's roommate from down below. There's 4 people on this hike. Mason's roommate and his girlfriend, then this new girl and Mason. He yells from down below, and he's just this extrovert who's really juvenile. This moment's having a blank blank. It's like as if all of time is unfolded before us so we could just stand here and look out and scream, yeah, woo! Now, that's kind of a juvenile moment, but it prompts the couple sitting on the rocks up above him, the girl and Mason, to think a little bit. And she says, you know how everyone is always saying, seize the moment? I don't know. I'm kind of thinking it's the other way around, like the moment seizes us. Mason responds, yeah, I know. It's constant, the moments. It's like it's always right now, She agrees. He looks away, she looks at him. Then she looks away, he looks at her. Then they both look at each other in just that way, they're both thinking, gosh, I really like this guy, girl. I wonder if this is the one, And then the movie cuts to black and it's over. And just to emphasize the point, music comes up from a very popular band today, Arcade Fire. It's called, the song is called Deep Blue, and here's what it says. Here, at my place in time, and here in my own skin, I can finally begin. Let the century pass me by. Standing under my sky, tomorrow is nothing. It's just incredibly 60s existentialism, right out of Jean-Paul Sartre. You couldn't find in modern film a more existentialist way of viewing life. It's like always right now, But boyhood cheats, I think, because it ends hopefully. The viewer feels that Mason really feels like he's got his whole life ahead of him and sees it as an adventure filled with moments. Sure, some of joy, some of sadness, some of reward, some of punishment, but all to be embraced and simply lived until the next one comes. Classic existentialism could not get over the loss they felt at the knowledge that we create our own meaning, because it made life absurd and random and without any ultimate significance. This popular form of it simply chooses to ignore the consequences of the future, particularly the looming specter that so terrified Sartre and Albert Camus and Samuel Beckett and all the other existentialists, and that was death. That specter dominates, in some ways, the other movie thought to be in contention for the big prize, Birdman. The film concerns the life of Regan Thompson, played by Michael Keaton in the performance of his career. Popular but shallow superhero actor who wants to be taken seriously, so he writes, directs, and stars in a Broadway play based on a Raymond Carver short story. In the film, references abound to death, particularly suicide, as Thompson struggles with his celebrity, the emptiness of his power, his own hubris, the effect that he's having on others. Spoiler alert, Thompson decides to commit the meaning-creating act of his life, and this was often talked about among existentialists in the 60s. He decides to commit the meaning-creating act of his life by committing suicide on stage. But he either messes that up by blowing off his own nose or by changing his mind at the last minute, or possibly, but I think unlikely, planning to blow off his nose all along with a real gun. What happens before that in 2 important scenes tells us what the filmmakers were intending. Again, 2 scenes. The first in his dressing room. He's been going through the plays, making a change, and into his dressing room walks his ex-wife, Sylvia, played by Amy Ryan, wonderful actress who hasn't gotten nearly the opportunity to act as much as she should have. She's been in a lot of stuff, but boy, she's very good. Anyway, Regan declares his love for her and brings together the themes of family and responsibility and what is actually real in this conversation. Their daughter's name is Sam, as I read this dialogue to you. Riggin, I love you. And I love Sam. Sylvia, I know. I really wish I wouldn't have videotaped her birth, though. Why? Because I just missed the moment, really. I don't have it. I should have just been there with the two of you. You know, just the three of us. But I wasn't. I wasn't even present in my own life. And now I don't have it. And I'm never going to have it. Well, you have Sam. Not really, I don't. I mean, she's, oh, no. Listen, she's just going through. No, I get it. I understand. She needed a dad. Instead, she got this guy who was a 3-day viral sensation. It's so pathetic. I can't. No, come on. There are things much more pathetic than that. Yeah, like that mustache. You know. And then they kiss, and he tells her to get back to her seat, and it's really an interesting setup for one of it's the penultimate scene in the movie, but it's virtually the crux of the whole movie. Because when she goes out, he pulls down a real gun from a shelf, not the toy one he's been using in all the previews that you've seen already. He checks and makes sure it's loaded. In this scene, the key is that he regrets actually living the moment of his daughter's birth rather than trying to do so vicariously through a videotape. Interesting comment, by the way, in a movie about film and its reality. He even says, I wasn't even present in my own life. Telling admission. He doesn't really believe that he existed because he didn't act authentically. He videotaped it, thinking it would be the same thing. But even more important is this penultimate scene in the film when Riggin is on stage. In the play, he's playing a guy named Eddie who has just broken into a motel room where he discovers his wife with her lover. He brandishes a gun at both of them. She admits she doesn't love him anymore. And his answer forms the heart of the struggle of the real Riggin Thompson within the story of the movie. Riggin says, why? I just want you to tell me why. What's the matter with me? Tell me what's the matter. Why do I always have to beg people to love me? I just wanted to be what you wanted. What you wanted. Now I spend every effing minute trying to be something else. Something I'm not. I don't exist. I'm not even here. I'm not even here. Then he starts walking around. He points the gun at the Edward Norton character, who was the guy who was with his wife. It goes bang. And Norton, who has made a point as an actor that the toy gun really didn't scare him at all, he can see it's a real gun. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And the look in his eyes is amazing. Then he points the gun at the audience and he goes bang, just acting it out. The terror in the audience, in your mind and heart, is just palpable because you don't know what he's going to do here. It looks like a real gun. It is a real gun. Riggin then puts it up, as the play tells him to, and shoots, blowing his nose off again. His nose is gone. The nose is a big deal in this movie because Birdman has this big beak, and anyway. It looks like what he's done. You don't know that he's not dead. You think he's dead. It looks like he has done what Camus said was the one authentic act that we could do, and that was suicide. The audience has a moment in which it stays silent. Then they wildly applaud, a thumping, rousing, standing ovation. And one of the important subplots is what the critics are going to say about this movie. And only the New York Times critic leaves. Now, I'm a Christian theologian, and I believe that Christianity spends a lot of energy encouraging us to realize that the present is the only moment we have in which to act responsibly. We share this in common with existentialism. This focus on the present in the journey of our own lives. We can do nothing about the past because we cannot alter it, and we can do nothing about the future because we do not know what challenges it will bring. Therefore, following the Good Shepherd in the moment is what we are called to do, and it's enough. One doesn't have to look far in Christian teaching for support of this way of living. I think of Jesus' statement in the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6. Or the ancient wisdom of Proverbs. Don't boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Those two statements are about the future, but similarly, the regrettable past in Christian thought is forgiven and forgotten if you are a believer, in a very real sense for the Christian. And while the memory of works of beauty and goodness that may have been done to us and by us are great gifts, we can't change those moments, even though, of course, we wouldn't want to. But, and it's a very large but indeed, all our understanding of both the past and the future takes place in a universe in which God oversees the past, the present, and the future from his eternal stance outside of time. He bestows meaning to our existential moments in the framework of an ethical structure based in the law, which in turn is based in his character, and a metaphysical structure based in his revelation of himself as creator, redeemer, and sustainer. All meaning flows from him and provides us a rich and satisfying philosophy by which to live and in which to believe. That means he gives meaning to both the past and the future. And so we, his creatures, can rest assured about both the reality of and the significance of both the past and the future. So we can mourn the past and remember the past, and we can plan for the future, because both do have a significance because of God. We may not be able to change them exactly, but we look at them with very different perspectives than do the existentialists. But none of this is found in the films we're looking at tonight, and that should not be surprising. Now, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, Selma depicts real events that were done in the midst of a deep and sophisticated Christian theology of nonviolent pacifism. But you would almost not know it from looking at the film. Now, I've only seen it once because the DVD isn't out yet and I just couldn't. But I do not remember a single time when the principal characters in the movie pray or read scripture together in an intimate atmosphere. Of course, they pray on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in Selma, but even that is interestingly suspect if you want to ask me about that later. I know something about that historical event, what was going on there. But none of this, there are plenty of intimate moments in the film, but none that God seems actively involved in. And perhaps I'm asking too much. There clearly are worship services depicted at which Martin Luther King preaches, and one of the most poignant moments in the movie is the event that so affected the nation, when the 4 little girls walking down the stairs after church become the victims of a powerful bomb that in slow motion dramatically depicts the horror of that particular incident. But I'm struck that while the filmmakers wanted to make sure to at least include one scene when King confesses his infidelities to his wife Coretta, very intimate scene, there's not a single one of what must have been many thousands in which he prayed as an individual in his own prayer closet, or read scripture and sought answers in scripture. Now maybe I'm wrong. Again, I don't have access to the movie. I've only seen it once. But if Selma had such scenes, they didn't make a strong impression on me at least. You could bring up the theory of everything, in which the Christian Jane Wilde marries the atheistic scientist Stephen Hawking and comes off looking reasonably good. Much of the dialogue in the film, especially in the early parts, centers around her faith and his lack of it, and she comes off as something of an equal in the debate. However, the triumphant philosophical statement in this movie comes near the end when Hawking is making a speech on his book tour for the runaway bestseller, A Brief History of Time. Many of you will remember that. Almost everyone at the event is portrayed in a sort of worshipful mode. There are cuts to old friends smiling admiringly, and his introduction by his professor, is just hagiographic to say the least. And Hawking cracks a number of jokes and has everybody laughing and all that. But then the tenor of the moment turns serious in this movie again, as a man stands up and says, "Professor Hawking, you have said that you do not believe in God. Do you have a philosophy of life that helps you?" His answer comes in the robotic voice that his computerized wheelchair makes for him. Quote, I do have the DVD here, so I've got this word for word. Quote, "It is clear that we are just an advanced breed of primates on a minor planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. But ever since the dawn of civilization, people have prayed for an understanding of the underlying order of the world. There ought to be something very special about the boundary conditions of the universe. And what can be more special than that there is no boundary? And there should be no boundary to human endeavor. We are all different. However bad life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. While there is life, there is hope." Now you have to be sympathetic to this. Here's a man with ALS saying something that, positive. He has made something out of his life. And of course there's this rousing, weepy standing ovation at that speech. This is not the realism of the existentialism I was describing earlier, but it's not theism either. And certainly not a defense of Christianity. It's humanism, pure and simple. And it's shallow, I think, again, in keeping with the medium of film, which is not set up really to explore a philosophical theme in depth. We could have talked about a lot tonight. The view of the American family that is shown in these movies. Birdman has got a lot on family. Boyhood has got a lot on family. Imitation Game, it's very interesting about sexuality and family in a different kind of way. Marriage and family is important themes in several of the movies. But as we think about how the movies might continue to be a force, challenging the culture of this great land and of the world which still watches American films voraciously, I think we need to take seriously the sometimes despondent, sometimes shallow, sometimes both, philosophy that Hollywood is offering us. We will be shaped by it, perhaps not as much as in former times, perhaps more than now in the future. Who knows where the influence of this incredible medium will go? But that shaping needs to be understood and evaluated. As I've discussed, I choose to do that evaluation from a Christian perspective, and I do so because I believe it's the truth about reality in all its aspects. Thank you.
It's going to take about a half an hour to ask Drew any questions you might have about any of the movies or anything related to what he had to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
Considering that this year was one of the worst box office years, from what you were just describing in these movies, looking back on those years where there were really big box office years, what differences do you see? Is this the theme that you're talking about here, the existentialism, the in the moment, is that what has, basically crashed the box office? Or is there something else that you see in there?
What it is that we know is that in the mind of probably the best representatives of at least one of the most powerful artistic communities in the world, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Not just everybody in Hollywood is a member of the Academy. I have a son who's trying to make it as an actor. He's been on television. He's been in movies, but he's not a member of the Academy because you just don't get that given to you. You have to be voted in, and it's a very great honor. That group of people have self-selected a group of movies that are dealing with very serious subjects rather than with the box office giants. Now, they love it when they think that there's both there, okay? I mean, there were interesting themes in Titanic, whatever you think of it. And certainly The Lord of the Rings, thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien. Frankly, not thanks to Peter Jackson, but Tolkien's, brilliance just shines through anyway. But that doesn't happen that often, and it certainly didn't happen in the big box office winners last year. I mean, the two movies ahead of American Sniper were The Hunger Games 3.5, or 2.5 rather, and Guardians of the Galaxy, which was a fun movie and funny, but really didn't have much serious thought behind it. I mean, it's no Star Wars. But I think it's something of an off year, but who knows? Maybe because the financial model works and because these people really want to make movies that have themes that they think are going to make their imprint and are going to last. Maybe we'll see more of this in the future and continue to see it in the Academy. I don't know. Maybe Americans will start going to movies like this more often, as they often do in Europe. I mean, there is no art house theater in Europe. Same theaters show big American box office winners and small little French films, that deal with existentialism and stuff, They don't make that distinction. And sometimes the small little French film wins big, in France. Or in Germany, same thing. Or in England. But here, you've really got that separation still, generally speaking. Make a long story short, who knows what the American public is going to cotton to. They certainly want to make money in Hollywood, and if you can make $500 million, even if it only costs you $100 million, even if it costs you $100 million to make the movie, you've made $400 million, as opposed to a movie costing you $5 and you make $50. You've still made 10 times, but you haven't made $400 million, So we'll see. We'll just see what happens. Yeah, you had your hand
I
up.
have two questions.
Sure.
One, maybe you could give us a little bit of a quick understanding of how the Academy selects the best movies for the year in terms of how many people are in the Academy, and do they pick a certain number and then the highest vote gets it? That's my first question. My second question is, what about the influence of faith-based movies, things like Courageous, Fireproof, that never really get to the big scene in terms of the big screen, but they seem to be growing more in popularity. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I'd be happy to. They're both very good questions. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is made up, I think, of 4,500 or so people from all different fields: cinematographers, directors, actors, sound editors, makeup people, costume people, production designers, all these various people. The first vote that is taken prior to any of the announcement of who's been nominated is within your own category. You vote for a film, and that determines who the nominees are. So the 5 nominees for Best Director were selected only by the directors. The 5 Best Actor, Best Actress, 20 in all, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, were all by the actors in the Academy, which, by the way, has a huge majority within the Academy. All right? Nobody releases the names, really, but a lot of people know who's in it, and they're there in the audience and stuff, and it's hard to get a handle on exactly how many people are voting for what, and blah, 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 especially for the final vote, as I'll tell you in a minute. But, so that's why, and everybody votes for Best Picture. Now, in each of the single categories, I think there are 32 different categories. Some of them are not even read out on Oscars night. They're given out earlier, technical categories for this and that. Every category's only got 5 people, only 5 that can be nominated, whether it's a picture or a person, except for Best Picture, which used to be only 5 until 2009. And then The Dark Knight did not get nominated. And Hollywood got worried that it was only going for these smaller artsy films and they ought to be nominating things that are bigger. And so they got it through the Academy to make it possible to have as many as 10 movies nominated for Best Picture. It's between 5 and 10. And the nominees are made up of those pictures that got at least 5% of the vote for first place. The 5% first place votes, okay? So that's why it varies from year to year. In fact, this year there were only 8. Last year there were 9. The year before there were 9. So far since they did this, there haven't been 10. So it's never gotten up to its capacity because you had movies that didn't quite get 5% of the first place votes. But think about it, do the math, and it's not really a surprise. Then, after everybody's nominated, that's when the real campaigning begins, because everybody votes on everything. So cinematographers are having a say in who the best director is. And frankly, the actors then have a more powerful say in everything than all of that. So it's interesting. But the nominating process gets it down to really good, people. I mean, there was a lot of controversy about Best Actor because David Oyelowo did not get nominated for his performance in Selma as Martin Luther King. And it's a wonderful performance. And there were a lot of people that cried racism at Hollywood, which only awarded Best Picture to 12 Years a Slave last year, which had tons of black actors and actresses in it, and one of them won for Best Supporting Actress. Denzel Washington has won Best Actor. Sidney Poitier has won Best Actor even back in the 60s. So it's ridiculous. What I say to people is, okay, which one of those 5 that got nominated are you going to kick out? There are just so many great performances in the Best Actor category this year. So that's been some of the controversy, and the same thing with Ava DuVernay, who directed the movie. She's an African-American woman who did not get nominated for Best Director. So she didn't, but a lot of other people were claiming, sexism, racism, blah, blah, blah. But Catherine Bigelow and The Hurt Locker just won 2 or 3 years ago, and this is a female director, so it's crazy as far as I'm concerned. I think they really do try to vote for who they like. Now, what criteria do they vote on the basis of? There are no criteria that are published by the MPAA. Some people just say, well, I didn't get Birdman, so I'm not going to vote for it. They just vote for whatever they want to vote for. And for some people, it's probably very refined and very thoughtful. For other people, they just do whatever they want to. I'm convinced that when was this? 1998 maybe, or 97, I can't remember. No, 97 was Titanic. I can't remember. Anyway, that because a lot of these people don't go to the theater to see the movie because they get sent DVDs that are special DVDs called screeners that will self-destruct if they get put into your computer or something, they're really very jealous of these things. That because so many of the Academy saw Saving Private Ryan on a small screen, they really didn't get the impact of that incredible movie. And they gave it to Shakespeare in Love anyway. I mean, I'm convinced that it had something to do. Now that's probably thinking more highly of them than I should. It was probably because Shakespeare in Love was maybe 100 minutes and Saving Private Ryan was well over 2 hours, and they just didn't even watch it. Or they figured, well, Steven Spielberg, he's already gotten one. We don't want to give it, to that movie again. We won for Schindler's List, but he won Best Director and didn't win for Saving Private Ryan, which I thought was ridiculous too. But I can see splitting the movie and the director. But there's just all kinds of stuff that goes into that. Now, second question. I'll be briefer, sorry. Christian movies, I really think they're getting better and better and better. I'm pleased with that. I'm grateful for that. But as long as you decide that you are going to have a clear agenda that doesn't so serve a very human story, and frankly, a story that is understandable by non-Christians, you're going to be placed by the Academy and by the majority of people who vote for these awards into a category of minority that you're not going to be understood. And the guys down in Georgia, in Albany, Georgia, that have done Fireproof and some of these really getting better and better films, as long as they're all about Christians or the Christians are the main people, even if they do, like in Fireproof, have Christians struggling with real things, evangelical Christianity is not enough. Strangely enough, it's not in the mainstream of the artistic community at all, that they don't get it. It doesn't make sense to them. And I understand that. And I don't think we're a persecuted minority. I get really angry when I hear Christians talking about being persecuted. You don't know what persecution is unless you're an Egyptian Christian on the beach in Libya. That's persecution. But it doesn't mean that I think that we, have sort of an equal status or standing, that when somebody hears that I'm ordained in a Presbyterian church, that they will treat me the same as a movie critic as somebody else who may have equal training and equal objectivity, frankly. I mean, I like to think I try to be as objective as it's possible to be and be fair as I can be. I work hard at working against my presuppositions when I look at film. And I think we should all do that to some degree while not dishonoring the Lord, But that's a difficult road to walk. But there's not much sympathy for that, or even belief that we exist. I mean, that people, like I hope some of you are, like I hope I am, even exist. I don't see that. So anyway, that's what I think about the Christian film industry. I think the money would be better spent creating movies where you find out later, you're surprised because it was Christians that made this, because it's completely about a non-Christian story or a theme or whatever, but it's sympathetic, it makes some sense. But I'm very encouraged. I've got to tell another story, sorry. I've got to tell you all, I was able to go to the Sundance Film Festival this year. I do that on a regular basis, but I didn't go the year before. But I saw a movie called I Am Michael. James Franco played Michael. Zachary Quinto, who's well known as a gay in Hollywood, played his gay lover in the movie. The movie is a true story about a man named Michael Glatze, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, who was one of the leaders of the homosexual movement in the 1990s. Now, this was after the Harvey Milk, after it was really generating some momentum, but he was a leader. He was the first blogger. He was the first, he started the first internet magazine for the homosexuals, but he believed very strongly in queer theory, which essentially says, I'm told, I don't know much about it, but I'm told, believes that you simply choose your sexuality. There is no such thing as a male and a female. That you choose your sexual orientation. And he chose to be gay. But he got interested in people that call themselves homosexuals but then didn't choose to practice it. So he decided to do a story on it. And he ended up at Liberty in Lynchburg and talked to a kid who said, yeah, I'm gay, and people know that I'm gay, but I don't practice homosexuality at all, and I believe it's wrong. It's a sin, because I want to go to heaven. And Michael Glatze went, what are you talking about? And he said, well, That's what Christians believe. That's what the Bible teaches. This guy went out, bought a Bible, and the movie does not try to make this look like he read it one night and the next day he converts. I mean, he's got a Bible that over time, still with his gay lover, and now with another gay lover, a threesome. I mean, it's really talking about, you know, homosexual activity in one of its forms very strongly. He reads the Bible and comes to the conclusion that it tells the truth and that he doesn't want to go to hell either. And he converts to Christianity and stops practicing homosexuality. And the Zachary Quinto character goes, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I've got to leave. I can't do this anymore." He goes to a Bible school in Wyoming. He learns a lot about the Bible. But eventually he says, "You know, I appreciate all you've done for me." He goes in and talks to one of his teachers. "I appreciate all you've done for me, but I'm just beginning to hear about fear all the time, and you're just telling me I shouldn't do this, and I shouldn't do that, and I shouldn't do the other." And it seems to me the Christian faith is based in love, not in fear. And I mean, but he's respectful, and the movie is respectful of what he's learned from these people, and they're portrayed as real people. He meets a girl there, he gets married to her, and the movie ends with him about to preach his first sermon. Now, it quit. Now, the movie, and I saw this, and I'm glad to say I saw it. Part of the story is that he has panic attacks. And he has panic attacks right when he's about to change and go do something else. And the movie ends with him beginning to have a panic attack as he's doing his first sermon. So you can interpret that as, well, he's going to go off and do something else now. But the filmmaker comes on stage at Sundance like they always do. And he says, "I want you all to know, I'm gay. I think Michael someday is just going to give this Christianity stuff up and go. But I wanted to be fair to him because he hasn't yet. And he saw the movie last Saturday and he thought it was really good. And he and his wife are still there in Wyoming, still pastoring, only 2 years later. That's the difference. Let's hope Michael will hang on. You know, we all know that we don't know, you know, what will happen. But it was amazing in the way that it presented Christians in a very good light. And it's based on the memoir of the gay lover. The title of his book is something like My Lover, My Friend. And he's the one that wrote this because Michael continued to treat him as such a friend, even though he's completely split off from him and left him and doesn't have sex with him anymore. He wanted to be his friend still, and he worked hard at retaining that friendship. I mean, this is what we're supposed to do, isn't it? It was incredible. I couldn't believe it. I mean, Chariots of Fire was made, and not a single person on the whole set and the whole involvement of the movie, as far as I know, was a Christian. So it can happen. Yeah.
Hi. I actually, I have all my iTunes again. I actually have a whole podcast list, and one of the podcasts or actually videos was actually kind of related to your talk, which was about the whole aspect of movies or film in Christianity. And the speaker said that movies aren't simply not so much a matter of entertainment, although they can be that way, but they communicate something. And he illustrated that with the movie Contact.
Yeah.
With Jodie Foster, and of course the illustration was to point out that there is a sort of image or a viewpoint about how should you take Christian beliefs to be, like to what degree should they impact your life, and what areas of life you might think about. And so, I'm sure many people, like whether my age or college students, they don't go to movie theaters or watch movies for the purposes of educating themselves.
Yeah.
Or trying to figure out what does their faith have anything to do with the contents that the movie is endorsing. And so my question was, what do you think would be a good way of approaching movies for college students, either like in terms of like what questions they can ask themselves before they watch a movie, whether in terms of like how it treats Christians or Does it uphold like traditional morality, or even other little subtleties within the movie's contents and stuff? Like, what do you think would be a helpful way to help young people, whether high schoolers or college students, that they can approach these ways and not think that movies don't impact their belief systems?
This is going to sound self-serving. I do a weekend seminar called Show and Tell, How to View a Movie Responsibly. And I think it's a matter of understanding this medium, understanding how movies are made, thinking about them. A lot of people in your generation have an advantage that a lot of people in my generation didn't have, because there are making of featurettes on every DVD just about. And if you watch the 30 to 40 minute one on Birdman, it's fascinating. But the more you know about what went in to make the movie and the choices the filmmaker makes to support the content formally, in the form of how he positions the camera or how he moves the camera, all of these have psychological effects. And everybody in film school is taught what effect those particular things will have on you. The more you know about stuff like that, the more you objectify the experience, even as you're sitting there watching the movie. So you're not as powerfully affected by it, but you're also thinking about it on a regular basis. Now I also, and you should just email me, I've got a sheet of 10 questions that I recommend that people ask as they're watching a film if they want to try to think while they're watching it. I agree, we've got to let the filmmaker speak to us, and we've got to let ourselves be in the story, and so there's a certain danger to that. But there's an importance, or you're not being fair, to the filmmaker, to the person trying to give you a story. But at the same time, I really think you can eventually develop the ability to be thinking about stuff and to be looking for stuff, and especially when a bad film makes a bad mistake, it all of a sudden wakes you up and takes you out of it, and you go, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. Why did you do that? This guy would never have done that. Or usually it's a plot point, but sometimes it's lighting or camera angles or whatever, And I really think that's a good thing to do, but there are a number of questions you can ask. Some of them just general questions that don't have anything to do with the faith. Like the first question on the list is, with which character did you most identify and why? Another one is, what do you think the filmmaker was trying to say out of this film? What's the main theme? Sidney Lumet, who was one of the best-known directors in Hollywood until his death just a couple of years ago, and he may have been the greatest director other than Alfred Hitchcock never to win an Academy Award. Sidney Lumet wrote a book called Making Movies. It's a great book to read. But in it, he gives you one sentence of every movie he made, what they were about. Because he says, if I don't have that as the director, I don't know how to control what's happening. I'll go off on rabbit trails, but I can always pull myself back by saying, wait a minute, this movie is about the machines are winning. He made a movie called The Anderson Tapes, and it was about them. He made Network, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture. I forget what the main theme of Network was, but the point is, they boil it down to one sentence, and they're all trying to say something, no matter what they say. Now, there's also Hot Tub 2 versus Birdman. I mean, there are movies that are made without any thought of depth or serious interaction with you. But there, I think the thing to think about is, what is this doing to me as a person as I'm watching this? Is this making me more sexually active? Is it making me, more angry? Is it making me more... action films. If you're the kind of person that makes snap decisions already, and you see stuff happening on the screen in 2 hours, you see 7,000 decisions made in an instant, you're going to start making more snap decisions, and that'll be bad for you. So you maybe need to be more careful with action movies and sort of sit back more. I think there are things movies do to us, no matter what they are. And I think you need to know your own spiritual flashpoints too, as to what movies you even go see. Now, anybody who's heard me lecture knows that I recommend going to a whole lot more movies than most people go to, because I think it's such an important cultural barometer. But I think you need to know what you're doing as you go to those movies, and you need to go with an attitude that says, I'm going to think, I'm not switching off my mind when I walk into this theater.
And there's a great movie, by the way, to kind of piggyback on your last comment, that I think really helps with that, and that's the movie Belle. I don't know if everybody's ever heard of that movie.
Beautiful movie.
I thought it was a terrific movie.
Yeah.
I thought, I could like.
And that was made by Christians. That's a great example of how far they've come. It's just a very unfortunate marketing thing. And it shows how much those who are pro-choice in our culture hate pro-life ideas, because Belle is very strongly pro-life. But it was a great movie, beautiful movie, a couple of years ago. Yeah. Yes.
Dr. Trotter, thank you for your time. There's two films that were highly acclaimed, and I would care to have your thoughts on them. I'm surprised they didn't make the Academy's finalists.
Yeah.
But Unbroken and Interstellar, what are your thoughts on those two films?
Okay.
And also, as somebody who just critically watches films, what would you say are the top 5 that have just really impacted you? I know all time may be such a big thing to say, but what are some films then, if you don't want to say 5 exactly, that have impacted you?
I apologize. It's already 8:30, but I'll make this the last question now. Thank you. It's a very good question. Sadly, Unbroken was just not very well done. That is one magnificent story if you've read the book. And I think that it's the kind of story that resists filmmaking, easy filmmaking. Unbroken should have been an 8-session, 2 hours per session miniseries. Because even as hard as she tried to do it, and I think Angelina Jolie is quite a competent director, you had 3 completely separate stories, and there were 3 more or 4 more in his story that are fascinating stories. But you had his childhood going up to being a runner. Then you had his time on the ocean, 47 days in a life raft or whatever it was. And then you had the prisoner of war camp story. And they weren't equally treated, but they were both treated very significantly. And it just got tiresome. It just got burdensome for too many people to watch. I mean, I liked it, but I thought some of the imagery was heavy-handed with the cross thing, at the end where he had the beam on his shoulders and all that. And I didn't like the fact that they cut out, his becoming a Christian and his dealing with PTSD and all that he did have to deal. But at the same time, what I would really say is it may resist the film medium, period. And I think a lot of people felt that. A lot of people did not. It had a wonderful cinematographer. It had very competent, good performances, but people criticized the script because of this thing that I was just talking about, which I agree with. And they also criticized some other aspects of the movie. And it didn't help Angelina Jolie to be, half of Brangelina or whatever it is, It's too bad for both of those people, because Brad Pitt is a pretty competent actor too, and they just get trashed all the time. Interstellar did the same thing. It went on too long, and it just wasn't, it was so hyped that if it wasn't the absolute best thing that Christopher Nolan has ever done, it wasn't going to succeed. I mean, these people were on the cover of Time magazine before the movie even came out. It was just nuts. And it was very good. I liked Interstellar much more than I liked Unbroken as a movie, technically. But I thought the Matt Damon piece just should have been dropped and focused more on the part, the guts of the movie, where he's in time, pushing the books, and his daughter on the other side, and they missed a chance to maybe even give some more time to that, or just focus it more there because they don't have this extra time spent, running around on some planet with Matt Damon, and that's my personal view on that. I haven't seen anybody else say that, but that's what I think. But I thought it's a fascinating topic to deal with time, the moment again, and how fungible time is and stuff in an Einsteinian universe. And I thought it was a very interesting movie. I didn't feel like it was Christian, but I didn't feel it was necessarily non-Christian either. It didn't focus on that. It just played with it to some degree. And Christopher Nolan's a very thoughtful filmmaker. It's a very good film. But those two. Those are my views on those two. I usually get asked the question, what are my favorite movies? And my criteria are technical excellence, to some degree, historical verification. In other words, people are still watching this movie years and years after it came out. But there are several movies that I would recommend. My favorite movie of all time is a lot of people's favorite movie, frankly, and that's Casablanca. It's just the best written script I've ever. It has the best dialogue of any movie ever, anywhere. But the way it paces itself, and the acting, and the chemistry, and everything about it. I mean, it's a 40s movie, sure. It's black and white, sure. But it's really, really expertly done. And it's really fun. And I see something new every time I watch Casablanca. And I just saw it, a month ago. But it's really an amazing piece of filmmaking. Growing to be a close second for me is another one that a lot of Christians like, and that's The Shawshank Redemption. Amazing, amazing movie. Again, the writer of the story on which it's based, Stephen King, he is far from an evangelical Christian, believe me. I mean, he's personally he says in public he's agnostic, but he really doesn't like these other people who think they know everything and blah, blah, blah. And he's always referring to Christians when he says that. And Frank Darabont, who just seems like the nicest guy in the world, was the director and co-wrote the screenplay. Very responsible for it. It kind of amused that Christians watch this movie and talk about it in Sunday school classes and stuff, because it didn't have a thing to do with it for him. But King is quite clear that the Andy Dufresne character is a Christ figure. I mean, gee whiz. There's no doubt. He redeems. The Shawshank Redemption is the redemption of Red, not Andy. And so anyway, it's a great movie. So that's two movies that I really like, and I would say I never really thought through 5, but that's a couple. Thank you. We need to let you leave.